As Mary, nearing her late 50s, reflects on her life, she finds herself at a turning point. With her 2 children, one on the brink of marriage and the other thriving in college, she senses her motherly duties waning. As a former nurse, she contemplates a return to caregiving, feeling the pull of her profession once more. However, life throws her a curveball when she receives distressing news. Her father-in-law, Bob, has suffered a stroke. Rushing to the hospital at her husband John's urgent call, Mary's thoughts swirl with concern. Bob, always a pillar of kindness and warmth, has been grappling with the loss of his wife, Alice, for the past 3 years. Despite Mary's efforts to uplift his spirits through family gatherings and outings, she's noticed a gradual decline in Bob's energy. Just as she begins to see glimmers of his old vitality returning, the news of his stroke hits her like a thunderbolt. Arriving at the hospital, she finds Bob's daughter and son-in-law engaged in conversation, a mix of emotions swirling within her. "Apologies for my tardiness. How's Bob holding up?" I gasped out, hurting to catch up with John's sister, Isabella. Her response was a sigh of irritation as she glanced my way. Clearly annoyed. "You're late. We're in a hurry. Can you handle this?" With that brisk dismissal, she hurried off, leaving me behind. Isabella's indifference towards Bob was palpable, a demeanor she carried even when Alice, Bob's late wife, was alive. Despite Bob and Alice's unwavering kindness, Isabella remained aloof, untouched by their warmth. Left alone in the waiting area, I paced nervously, my thoughts consumed by Bob's condition. Meanwhile, John rushed in, his concern evident in the beads of sweat on his forehead and his soaked dress shirt. "Mary, how's Dad?" he asked anxiously. I shook my head, indicating I had no updates yet. John's reaction was visceral. He dropped the bags he was carrying, his complexion draining of color. "No, that's not what I meant," I reassured him quickly. "He's still in surgery. We're waiting for news." Relief washed over John, evident in the way he retrieved his fallen bags and slumped into a nearby chair. "Should we brace ourselves?" I hurried over to John, who teetered on the edge of tears, and placed a comforting hand on his back. "It'll be all right," I murmured, feeling utterly helpless with no words substantial enough to offer solace. Hours ticked by before the surgery's conclusion, and we were ushered into a small room by the doctor for an update. "The surgery went well, but there may be lasting effects," the doctor explained gently, indicating that Bob would require ongoing care. While our hearts hoped for Bob's swift recovery, the reality of caregiving loomed, a responsibility that would involve Isabella and her husband. John and I decided to reach out to Isabella to discuss the next steps. After a conversation, we agreed to convene at Bob's home, a gathering necessitated by the circumstances while Bob remained hospitalized. "I won't be his caregiver," Isabella declared bluntly, sending shockwaves through John and me. "But what are we supposed to do then?" I countered, baffled by her indifference. Isabella, nonchalant, continued toying with her meticulously manicured nails, a stark contrast to the gravity of the conversation. Her husband, Tom, simply nodded along. "What about a nursing home?" I suggested, met with Isabella's vehement refusal. "I'm not wasting money on that. This is what happens whenever I get involved," she snapped, shooting me a venomous glare. "It's like my opinion doesn't matter, so I keep quiet. If he can't go to a facility and neither of you will care for him, what's the plan?" John pressed, frustration seeping into his voice. "That's why you should handle it. I don't want some burden in my home," Isabella chuckled callously, pushing me to my breaking point. "Enough. He's your father, for heaven's sake," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I don't care. Why am I expected to bear the responsibility just because he's my father? He's John's father too. I've been saying you two should handle it." "I don't have a response to that. We'd love to care for him at home, but our house isn't equipped for it," I explained, feeling the weight of reality pressing down. "There are too many obstacles, stairs, uneven floors, to bring my father-in-law here. We need significant renovations, and we simply can't afford it." "Mary, you're trained in caregiving, aren't you? It shouldn't be a big deal," Isabella remarked smugly, her tone grating on my nerves. John shared my frustration, and we silently agreed to table the discussion for now, retreating from his parents' home. "What's our next move, Mary? You mentioned considering a return to caregiving," John inquired, his concern evident. "It's not just about the job. We have to make this place safe for Dad, and that's a financial challenge," I replied, trying to reassure him. "You're right," John conceded, acknowledging the daunting road ahead. I estimate it could cost around $100,000. That's just a ballpark figure, but considering the modifications needed for the entire first floor to accommodate him, that's roughly what we're looking at. I mused aloud, grappling with the daunting financial reality. With our eldest still in college, we simply don't have that kind of money. We're still paying off the mortgage, and the thought of taking on another loan for renovations is overwhelming. It's a difficult decision, but should we consider a facility for him? The question is, would he even be able to get in? The waitlists are long, and the expenses significant, and I doubt Isabella and her family would offer any assistance. It feels like we're stuck with no viable solution. Deciding to at least listen to my father-in-law's perspective, I made my way alone to the hospital where he was admitted. Stepping into his room, I was greeted by a sight that lifted my spirits. My father-in-law, visibly improved, greeted me with a warm smile. "Please don't apologize," my father-in-law would often murmur upon my visits. "There's no trouble at all. And look, I've brought you one of your favorite books today." "Why apologize? You're bringing me joy," I'd respond, trying to uplift his spirits. The doctor had informed us of his stroke, leaving him unable to move the right half of his body independently. To read, he'd prop the book on the table, using a weight to keep the pages steady. "Ah, thank you," my father-in-law replied gratefully, accepting the book I'd brought. I gently placed the book by his pillow. "Dad, I came today because I wanted to talk about what lies ahead," I began, meeting his warm smile with a heavy heart. "Oh, I understand. I'll be fine, even in a nursing home. I've prepared for it, so please don't worry," he reassured me, though I sensed a flicker of loneliness in his eyes. "Well, Dad, if you're open to it, why not come stay with us? I have experience in elderly care, and as a stay-at-home mom, I have the time. John will be there too. Let's live together," I blurted out, sensing his solitude. His surprise was evident, perhaps realizing deep down that returning to his own home, where Isabella and her husband resided, might not be feasible. I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd view him as a burden, ultimately leading to a nursing home. The thought weighed heavily on me, overshadowing my initial intention to listen to my father-in-law's wishes. There was a twinge of guilt toward my husband John, but I knew he'd understand. Now, we needed to arrange for his care upon discharge. Money was a concern, so I decided to seek Isabella's input. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I made my way home. When John returned from work, I recounted the events at the hospital. He appeared troubled but nodded, almost as if he had anticipated this turn of events. Without delay, John dialed Isabella's number. "We're reaching out for assistance because we'll be the ones caring for Dad," John explained, his voice tinged with frustration as their conversation escalated. With a resigned sigh, he ended the call and briefed me on their exchange. "Isabella refused to contribute any funds. It seems there's little we can do about it," he disclosed, his concern evident as he contemplated the financial implications for his father-in-law. From then on, our home buzzed with activity. We deliberated over renovations, essential care supplies, and received guidance on home care options. When I informed my father-in-law that he'd be moving in with us upon discharge, his expression was a mix of gratitude and regret. "Mary, could you fetch the checkbook from over there?" he requested, gesturing toward a cloth bag on the shelf. Curious as to why he'd need it, I obliged, retrieving the checkbook during one of our visits. Observing my father-in-law, I watched as he opened the bank book and presented it to me. "I have some savings here. Could you and John make use of it?" The figure written in the checkbook was staggering, surpassing any amount I'd ever seen. Stunned, I must have appeared frozen, prompting my father-in-law to chuckle. "You and John will be looking after me now, won't you? I heard about the new car, the renovations to make the house accessible. Would $10 million cover it? $10 million. The zeros overwhelmed me, leaving me speechless. I could have fathomed why my father-in-law had amassed such a fortune, but it seemed that after my mother-in-law's passing, he had turned to investments he had been studying, and they had proven lucrative. His savings had grown exponentially, fueled by his restrained spending habits. Yet even if he intended to renovate the house or purchase a car, the sum seemed excessive. Reluctantly, I returned the bank book, shaking my head. "I can't accept this much. Please keep it for yourself." He pushed the book back toward me, insisting, "I can't possibly use all of this. I'd rather return it to you and your family, who are willing to care for me." Once again faced with the returned bank book, I stood my ground. "I really can't accept such a large sum," I insisted firmly. After a brief pause, my father-in-law proposed, "How about $1 million?" Realizing the impasse, I managed to negotiate a compromise, settling on a reduced amount of $100,000. Though he seemed reluctant, he agreed, and for the time being, that seemed satisfactory. As we were in the midst of this exchange, Isabella suddenly appeared, catching us off guard. Quickly, I stashed the bank book back in its place. Seeing my hurried actions, Isabella's brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on?" she inquired, her voice tinged with worry. I breathed a sigh of relief, grateful she hadn't overheard our previous conversation. Isabella had come to deliver some clothes for our father. After a brief exchange, we left the hospital room together. However, on our way home, Isabella suggested stopping by a coffee shop for a discussion. Given her history of bringing up unpleasant topics, I braced myself for what was to come. Reluctantly, I acquiesced, unaware of the twist awaiting us. "I'll take care of Dad," Isabella declared out of the blue, stunning me. Her sudden proposition caught me off guard, especially since we were already knee-deep in preparations to accommodate my father-in-law, including ongoing renovations to our home. I couldn't fathom why she would make such a proposal at this stage. "So you won't need to visit the hospital anymore," she added. "Visiting isn't solely the responsibility of the caregiver. There's no rule dictating that only the caretaker should visit." Why would she say that? I pondered, feeling perplexed by Isabella's unexpected offer. Despite my reservations, I suggested we postpone discussing it further and made my exit from the cafe. Back at home, I shared the encounter with John, who mulled over it before a realization dawned on him. "She must have caught wind of the savings," he concluded. "It seems that's the case," he added. "Otherwise, she wouldn't have volunteered for the caretaking role, especially given her previous reluctance." I harbored a vague suspicion that Isabella had somehow discovered the extent of my father-in-law's savings and was angling to secure a share of it for herself. Perhaps she would concoct a reason to start dipping into the funds. "But what do we do about it?" I queried, feeling a sense of unease. "I've got an idea. Let's give her a chance," John suggested with a mischievous grin, hinting at a plan brewing in his mind. Uneasy about his scheme, I opted to stay silent and play along with Isabella's request for the time being. I assured my father-in-law that financial concerns were no longer an issue and that Isabella would be providing care. His response was vague, his expression neither confirming nor denying his comprehension. With that, the conversation concluded. Following his discharge from the hospital, my father-in-law returned to the family home in Nebraska, where Isabella resided. During a visit to the house, I couldn't discern any signs of renovation or adequate caregiving supplies. I questioned whether genuine caregiving could take place under such circumstances. However, it was Isabella's decision, and I felt it wasn't my place to intervene, so I remained silent. 2 months later, I received a frantic call from Isabella. "Mary, I can't do this anymore. Please come over right now," she pleaded urgently. Concerned, I wasted no time and rushed to the house in Nebraska. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by a disarrayed house and a foul odor lingering in the air. Puzzled by the scene before me, Isabella emerged, looking more worn out than ever. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her movements were unsteady. "Are you all right?" I asked, rushing to her side, alarmed by her condition. Isabella grasped my hand tightly and muttered, "Get rid of that." Confused at first, I managed to calm her down and coax an explanation out of her. It appeared that she had underestimated the demands of caregiving. From assisting with mobility and meals to managing incontinence, including dealing with diapers, the responsibilities had overwhelmed her. She felt incapable of managing anything, not even attending to her own needs. I reassured her that I couldn't make any immediate decisions but promised to reach out as soon as possible. With a heavy heart, I carried this burden home with me. "It's been 2 months already." "Impressive," John remarked, glancing at the calendar. It seemed he had anticipated this turn of events. He suggested we pick up my father-in-law on his next day off, and I readily agreed. A few days later, as we arrived at the family home in Nebraska, my father-in-law was already packed and prepared to depart. Relief washed over me knowing we could finally bring him home. Just because I endured for 2 months and used to live here doesn't mean I don't deserve compensation. "I think $5 million sounds fair," Isabella declared suddenly as we were assisting my father-in-law into the car. I froze in disbelief. John, too, was taken aback, turning to face Isabella with a mixture of surprise and dismay. But she remained unfazed, sporting a smug expression. "Isabella, What on earth are you talking about? This isn't the time or place to discuss money, especially not in front of Dad. Remember, he raised us, John reasoned, attempting to appeal to her sense of decency, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. I'm his daughter. It's only fair that I get compensated, Isabella retorted defiantly, her audacity catching me off guard. How could she be so brazen? Appalled by Isabella's attitude, I couldn't hold back. Isabella, discussing money in this manner is completely inappropriate. Besides, you've already received funds, I interjected, my father-in-law echoing my sentiment with a disbelieving expression. That's all gone now. Just $5 million. What's the harm in that? If you're just going to squander it away, you might as well put it to good use, sis. Isabella's callous words towards her own father left me speechless. Even my typically composed husband John was visibly enraged, his face flushing red with anger as he glared at his sister. John, it's all right, she's stating the truth. Bob, my father-in-law, attempted to calm his incensed son. Then, turning to Isabella with a stern demeanor, he delivered his verdict. Isabella, you are no longer welcome in this house. Leave immediately. His tone was cold and final. Stunned by his words, Isabella stood frozen in shock. What? What are you saying? I'm your daughter, Dad, Isabella exclaimed in disbelief. I have only one child, my son, and this woman beside me, Mary, is my daughter-in-law. I no longer recognize you. Leave with your foolish husband. Bob, my father-in-law, responded with a sternness that startled me. I had only known him to be gentle and soft-spoken, but now his eyes were steely, commanding no opposition. Even Isabella seemed subdued by his authority. Shall we depart then? We're relying on you moving forward, Bob continued, his demeanor shifting back to its usual warmth as he addressed me. With no other recourse, John and I complied with his directive. As we drove away, leaving Isabella behind in stunned silence, it felt surreal. Later, we learned that Bob had arranged with his lawyer to draft a last will and testament, ensuring that the inheritance would solely benefit John and guaranteeing that Isabella would not receive any portion of it. With Isabella gone, the house stood vacant and John and I expressed our desire to reside there. Bob gladly agreed. Isabella and her husband relocated to an apartment, but it became evident they had been tapping into Bob's finances even when he was in good health. Their extravagant spending habits landed them in debt, and now they struggle to settle it. Each day, I can't shake the feeling that this downfall was bound to happen for someone like Isabella, who lacks respect and gratitude towards her parent, regardless of biological ties. While tending to Bob's needs presents its challenges, my background in caregiving allows me to handle it without feeling burdened, and our relationship remains strong.
I was shocked to discover that Kenny, who hadn't even attended my mother's funeral, had unexpectedly flown abroad with $200,000. What on earth did you do with such a sum? I asked him. Do you remember that grand piano we had at home? I sold it, man, Kenny replied. Coming from a wealthy family sure had its perks. That was a fine piano. I never imagined it would fetch $200,000. It seems Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano at home was his. My condolences. The inheritance rights to the family estate are all mine. However, that piano was originally bought by our grandfather for my brother, and it still belongs to him. My brother, who's always loved the piano and now works as a piano teacher, left it at our family home because it was too big for his house. Given my brother's strong sense of ownership, he would be furious to know that something of his had been sold without his consent. Knowing my brother, simply compensating him won't be enough. When I told Kenny this, he hung up immediately. My name is Rachel Schneider. I'm a 45-year-old office worker. My family has a distinguished lineage that dates back to colonial times and is well known in our community. Moreover, thanks to my late father's successful business, we now own assets worth $9 million. Originally, my older brother was supposed to inherit the family estate. However, he had a girlfriend from a family that also required an heir. Desiring to marry her at all costs, he declared that he would give up all inheritance rights in exchange for not taking over the family responsibilities. This left me with the challenge of needing to find a spouse to continue the family name. Even though I had always wanted to be independent without relying on family wealth, I focused solely on my career. Before I realized it, I found myself in my mid-40s and still single. I needed to find someone, or a family line would end with me, so I took a leap of faith and attended a singles mixer. That's where I met my current husband. His name is Kenny, and he's surprisingly 10 years younger than me. Yet, at the party, he didn't pay attention to any of the younger women and came straight to me. "Are you sure you want to be with someone as old as me?" I asked him repeatedly, but Kenny looked straight into my eyes and answered, "I'm a bit shy and not very assertive. I've always been drawn to older, more grounded women." True to his words, Kenny gave off a gentle, reserved vibe. I felt that he could bring some peace to my assertive family dynamics. As our relationship progressed, there was something I had to tell him. My mother had been bedridden due to illness since last year, and I was taking turns with my sister-in-law, Catherine, to care for her. Wondering how to break the news since we were considering marriage given our age, I finally mustered the courage to tell him on our third date, and to my surprise, he gladly accepted and even proposed, expressing his willingness to help with the caregiving. His kindness deeply touched me, at least that's how I felt in the beginning. Kenny, who works as a daycare teacher, seemed genuinely committed. However, a few months into our marriage, he suddenly expressed a desire to quit his job. When I inquired about the reason, he looked remorseful and said, "Sorry, Rachel. The parents at my daycare are just too demanding, and there's a lot of complaining. I just can't handle it anymore." Understanding the challenges he faced, I would normally have encouraged him to persevere. However, with him already helping with my mom's care, I found myself unable to say a word. Adding to the complexity, I was 3 months pregnant. Wanting to get along well with Kenny for the sake of our unborn child, I adopted a lenient attitude. Unfortunately, my leniency led to regret. As I came out of the shower and attempted to enter the bedroom, I overheard Kenny whispering on the phone. The content of his call shocked me to the core. I managed to get married without her finding out I'm unemployed. She totally believed me when I told her I quit my job, when in reality, I quit like 2 years ago. It sounded like he was talking to one of his buddies, who responded, "Man, you're really something." Well, Rachel's family is pretty wealthy around here. I thought I hit the jackpot when I saw her at that dating event. But then again, given her age, I was probably the only one to approach her. The revelation left me feeling deceived. Was the gentle Kenny I knew all just an act? Despite the desire to confront him immediately, the thought of our unborn baby rendered me speechless. Discovering Kenny's true intentions shattered my confidence in our future. Today, Catherine, my brother's wife, will be taking care of my mom until 5:00 p.m., and then it's my turn. Pondering whether I should confide in someone about Kenny, that's when Catherine spoke to me, noticing my troubled expression. "Rachel, you look down. If something's troubling you, please share it with me. She's such a kind person, having taken care of her own mom for years, and she's really good with mine too." I confided in Catherine about Kenny, and she listened intently to my story. She reassured me, saying, "It's good you talked. Keeping this to yourself could have been harmful to your unborn child." I apologized for burdening her, but she responded with understanding, "No worries. Talking doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it surely lightens the load." Catherine seemed genuinely concerned, almost as if the situation were her own. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and without waiting for a response, Kenny entered. Both of us were taken aback, but Kenny acted as if nothing was amiss and smiled, saying, "Rachel, I'm going to help with your mom's care from today. You're not in the safe period yet, so I don't want you straining yourself." Kenny was putting on the act of a gentleman in front of me, and I reluctantly agreed. When Catherine tried to offer assistance, Kenny spoke first, questioning, "I've been meaning to ask, why are you taking care of your mother-in-law in this house?" He used the same tone he used on the phone. Catherine explained the situation, but Kenny started saying horrible things to her. He accused her of trying to curry favor and insinuated that she'd be upset for not getting a piece of the inheritance if she married into money. Enraged by Kenny's harsh words, I wanted to leave the room, but Catherine signaled with her eyes not to. I reluctantly stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold. Kenny's attitude escalated, and he declared, "This family's wealth belongs to us, my wife and me, so I'll take care of my mother-in-law by myself from now on." Realizing it was pointless to say anything more, Catherine left the scene. I quietly slipped outside, feeling the weight of Catherine's hurt. I pondered how to extend my apologies to her. Meanwhile, Kenny took over the responsibility of caring for Mom entirely. Despite my offers to assist, Kenny insisted that I shouldn't intervene. He merely outlined the basics of caregiving. But his negligent approach resulted in tragic consequences. Our mother passed away. The funeral took place in a church where generations of our family found their final rest. However, Kenny disappeared from the day of Mom's passing. Despite my attempts to locate him amidst funeral preparations and arrangements, his absence perplexed relatives and neighbors alike. Catherine, tearful before the altar, apologized for entrusting Kenny with caregiving responsibilities. Approaching Catherine in her distress, I attempted to offer solace. "Catherine, please don't blame yourself. It's not your fault," I insisted. She shook her head, anguish evident in her voice. "No, Rachel, it's not your fault. But where on earth is that man? I wanted to confront him today, and he vanishes just as Mom passes away." Agreeing with Catherine's sentiments, I reflected on Kenny's frequent absences during his supposed caregiving duties. Neighbors mentioned his frequent departures from the house, casting doubt on his commitment to the task. They even noted the arrival of a large truck on one occasion. Though curious, I refrained from probing further amidst the funeral proceedings. Days passed, and Kenny remained absent. Then, unexpectedly, a call from Kenny disrupted my thoughts. "Hey, Rachel, I'm currently at a luxury hotel in Europe," he nonchalantly announced. Stunned, I demanded an explanation for his absence from Mom's funeral and his current whereabouts. Kenny's response was unexpected. "I spent $200,000. The mention of such a sum immediately triggered memories of the grand piano at our family home. "I sold it, man. It was a good one. Who would have thought it'd go for $200,000? It turned out that Kenny had sold the family's grand piano and was using the money to travel around Europe. The piano, which Mom said was a family heirloom, was indeed worth around $200,000. Apparently, the hotels Kenny booked were all quite luxurious, and he had quickly spent all the money. I never imagined Kenny would do something like this while supposed to be taking care of Mom. Our family home had tight security, but with family, it's a different story. The truck that had been at our home must have been there to transport the piano. Why on earth are you doing something so selfish? The whole family was worried about you since you weren't at the funeral." I confronted Kenny, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "Well, you know when you have a kid, you won't have much free time anymore. You have a job, so I guess I got to be the stay-at-home dad," Kenny replied, surprising me with his nonchalant attitude. It's good that he wants to take on child rearing, but he seems intent on leeching off of me. Moreover, it appears Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano was mine. I explained to him that the piano originally belonged to my grandfather, who bought it for my brother. So the current owner is still my brother. "Oh, is that so? You scared me there. It'll be fine if I just apologize to your brother later, right?" Kenny seemed to lack any guilt about selling someone else's belongings. "Well, Kenny has only met my brother at our wedding, so it's understandable he's unaware of my brother's intimidating nature. My brother works as a piano teacher, and ever since he was a child, he loved the piano. He pleaded with our grandfather to buy that specific piano, though currently there isn't space in his house for it, which is why it's at our parents' house. Yet he's still the owner. While working at a piano school, he has also expressed his wish to start his own school using that very piano. The piano means more to him than anything else. I can only imagine what kind of punishment he would impose on Kenny after hearing that it was sold without permission. By the way, my brother has a strong personality and hates dishonesty." I continued explaining. Kenny remained silent throughout. When he finds out you sold his cherished grand piano, mere compensation won't cut it. My brother's not just strong-willed, but he doesn't settle for compromises either. I pondered the kind of punishment awaiting Kenny after our tense phone call abruptly ended. With a stern warning, I knew he was probably feeling regretful, racking his brains for explanations. Without delay, I called my brother and recounted everything about the call. Needless to say, he was livid. The next day, as Kenny rushed home and entered from the front door, his eyes widened at the sight of everyone gathered in the living room. "What's going on? Why is everyone here?" he stammered in confusion. I had orchestrated the timing so that the whole family would be present when Kenny returned. My brother, along with his wife Catherine, fixed Kenny with a menacing glare. "Kenny, I heard everything from Rachel. What were you thinking, selling someone else's property, especially something that valuable, without consulting the family?" My brother's voice was cold, cutting through the tension. Visibly nervous, Kenny tried to justify himself, claiming he was just trying to help with chores out of boredom when he stumbled upon the old grand piano. "Really? That piano was special, imported by our grandfather from a top European manufacturer. Where's the money from the sale?" My brother's stern expression demanded answers. As expected, my brother was playing the role of an interrogator, hoping to elicit a confession. Kenny hesitated, lost in thought, before stammering, the sale's money. Yeah, it hasn't come in yet." It was a feeble attempt at an excuse, and my brother's anger erupted. "You're lying. Just how rotten are you?" he thundered, his disappointment palpable. Pointing out Kenny's souvenir-laden suitcase from Europe, my brother accused, "What's with those souvenirs?" "I'm sorry, I used up all the money?" Kenny's admission silenced the room, the shock evident on everyone's faces. Spending $200,000 on an overseas trip seemed unfathomable. My brother, with controlled intensity, confronted Kenny. "I think you already know from Rachel, but that piano was mine. Now that it's gone, you're going to pay back every single penny. If you can't, I'm going to sue you for theft. You okay with that?" His words hung heavy in the air, his demeanor reminiscent of a mob boss. Kenny, clueless about the law, looked to me for help, pleading in a pitiful voice. What did he expect me to do? I had nothing to do with this. It was all his doing. When I rejected Kenny's attempt to justify selling the piano, he began saying something ridiculous. "Don't be so cold. I took care of your mom while you were pregnant. I just thought of the trip as a reward for myself after taking care of her. Let's just say we both decided to sell a piano. Since we're siblings, it won't be theft, right?" I was so dumbfounded that I couldn't close my open mouth. Catherine came to my rescue, stating firmly, "Enough is enough. Didn't you tell Rachel not to come for caregiving? You even told me you thought I was just after the inheritance and tried to drive me away. What did you say such awful things to my wife too?" Kenny admitted to his insulting behavior towards Catherine, but my brother's anger flared again. "Listen up. The reason my wife took care of Mom was because she didn't want to go to a facility. My wife had experience caring for her own mother, so she kindly agreed to do it for mine. Money is a later issue. First, apologize to my wife right here, right now." Grabbed by the collar, Kenny, with tears in his eyes, knelt down in front of Catherine, saying, "I'm so sorry, Catherine." Despite Kenny's apology, all the relatives looked at him with cold eyes. One of them shouted, "You better pay back the money from the piano sale as soon as possible. We can't have a criminal in the family. It'll tarnish the Schneider's name." Kenny, misunderstanding once again, made another odd remark saying, "Right, we can't have a criminal in the family, right, bro? So let's keep things calm. We'll save money together as a couple and pay back little by little." At Kenny's nonsensical interpretation, even my uncle was left speechless. Realizing that no matter what was said, it wouldn't resolve anything, I decided to fetch something from my room. Since the incident on the phone when Kenny was talking with a friend, I had the business card of a divorce lawyer ready. "Kenny, call this number. I want our relationship to be over." From now on, let's communicate through lawyers, I said as I thrust the card at him. His face turned pale, and Kenny exclaimed, "Why? We're about to have a baby, and yet, why are you doing this?" At that moment, I revealed what Kenny had been talking about with his friend on the phone. "Wait, you heard that? It was just a joke. You think that excuse will fly?" I responded, "I've known from the start that you approached me for my inheritance." Everyone present gave Kenny a cold stare, realizing there was no way out. Kenny retorted with a defiant attitude, "Darn, I thought I was going to get close to $9 million after we got married. I researched how much your mother left you." The sudden change in Kenny, who had always seemed so gentle, shocked everyone. Perhaps I should have been suspicious of a man like him from the beginning. I met Kenny at a dating event, and despite being 10 years younger, I thought we married for love. But his betrayal hurt me deeply. From now on, Kenny would be a stranger to me and my brother, so naturally, he had to pay back the money from selling the grand piano. Kenny broke down, saying he couldn't do that. But with all the relatives present willing to testify against him, there was no escaping the consequences. However, I assured him that I wouldn't ask for child support. "Really? Well, at least I'm grateful for that," Kenny responded. "In return, Kenny, you'll have nothing to do with this child. This is my child alone. You can't even claim to be its father," I firmly stated, placing my hand on my belly. Upon hearing this, Kenny looked devastated and collapsed. Since the divorce, he had been living in poverty, working odd jobs. One day, my phone rang, and it was Kenny. Despite not wanting anything to do with him, he kept calling, so I reluctantly answered. "Rachel, please help me," Kenny pleaded in a pitiful voice. He explained that the buyer of the grand piano he sold wanted to return it and get a refund. When Kenny sold the piano, he had claimed it was in pristine condition. However, there was a large engraving on the back made by my brother, claiming ownership. Kenny hadn't checked the back and likely sold it through a shady dealer. Now facing the consequences, Kenny had to return $200,000 to the buyer, and with what he owed my brother, it was a substantial amount. He later tried to file for bankruptcy, but my brother and I took legal action to stop him. Now burdened with even more debt, Kenny worked day and night doing manual labor. Eventually, the grand piano was safely returned, and my brother put a strong lock on the room where it was kept, even installing a security camera. "No one's going to touch that piano until I start my piano lessons," my brother declared, unchanged from his childhood. He expressed his wish to start a piano school at our family home, so I decided to discuss sharing our mother's inheritance. Catherine, my brother's wife, had taken care of our mother, and I felt guilty about inheriting everything by myself. Thanks to my brother agreeing with my decision, it seems we'll continue to have a good relationship with his family in the future. Blessed with a long-awaited baby girl, I became a single mom, but Catherine, who is already done with her parenting, is fully supporting me. My brother said he's going to step in as a father figure for my daughter, and he's excited about it. His influence has led his 2 adult daughters, who love the piano, to become kindergarten teachers. They have also come to adore my daughter. I feel fortunate to be supported by such a warm family, and with gratitude to those around me, I intend to live strong with my daughter. Years after falling ill, my wife and daughter returned with intentions to take over my house. But let's go back to the beginning. Initially, I received a diagnosis of advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, a surprise considering my active lifestyle, healthy diet, and regular doctor's appointments. The oncologist couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, and with slim chances of survival through rigorous therapy, I was determined to fight. Sitting down with my wife of 15 years, Daisy, and our teenage daughter, Luna, I broke the devastating news to them. Reassuring them of my commitment to combat the disease, I couldn't shake worries about the impact on our family dynamics. The doctor had warned that chemotherapy would be debilitating, mentioning that many marriages don't survive such treatments. That night, I shared my concerns with my wife, Daisy, who promised unwavering support through sickness, financial stability from good insurance, savings, and a trust fund eased concerns about our fully paid off house and Luna's college education. A week later, chemotherapy began, taxing my strength. Returning home drained and barely able to manage daily tasks, my wife and daughter stepped in, assisting with meals, housework, and transportation to appointments. 2 grueling months passed, and signs of agitation from my family emerged. Reluctance grew when I asked for help, and my daughter stopped responding to simple requests. The breaking point came when, running late for an early chemo appointment, my wife suggested I take an Uber due to her fatigue. Calling an Uber and the hospital for assistance, the driver was kind, ensuring my safe arrival. Grateful but disheartened by relying on strangers, I returned home to a troubling situation. Confronting my wife and daughter about their behavior, I sensed a chilling demeanor. I asked if they considered me a burden, and with a heavy sigh, my wife admitted feeling overwhelmed. My daughter timidly confessed she hadn't expected me to be so needy during my illness. Realizing it was time to discuss potential solutions, we began a difficult conversation. I proposed the idea of hiring a nurse to assist me a few days a week with daily tasks and accompany me to chemotherapy sessions, anticipating the days when I would be too weak to manage on my own. To make things more convenient, I ordered a wheelchair. Thankfully, my wife and daughter agreed to this plan. Seeking recommendations from the hospital, they sent a nurse who struck a balance between sweetness and sternness. She ensured I never missed a chemo appointment, received medication on time, and crafted a comprehensive care plan, including healthy meals. Despite these efforts to ease their burden, my wife and daughter remained discontent. My wife felt threatened, thinking the nurse was replacing her. I suggested that if she took on the responsibilities of driving me to chemo, filling prescriptions, and ensuring I ate and took medication on time, we could part ways with the nurse. Reluctantly agreeing to this compromise, my wife insisted on finding a male nurse, but I explained there were none on the recommended list, and the current nurse had specific experience with cancer patients. I made it clear that the nurse would only be replaced if my wife and daughter were willing to shoulder her responsibilities. Unhappy with this proposal, my wife argued that I should do more for myself instead of making my condition everyone else's problem. I tried to reason with her, explaining the toll chemotherapy took on my body. In a fit of rage, she stormed upstairs, slamming doors. Choosing to ignore her tantrum, I focused on my recovery. That night, I received a call from my mother-in-law, expressing displeasure about bringing another woman into her daughter's house. Though the house was technically in my name, I explained the necessity of the nurse due to the level of assistance I required. I emphasized that the nurse's presence would be temporary, lasting only for the remaining month of chemotherapy, provided the cancer didn't persist or worsen. While she seemed unconvinced, she eventually left me alone. For about a week after that conversation, things seemed relatively normal as my treatment progressed smoothly. Then, on one fateful day, after returning from a chemotherapy session, a moving truck greeted me as I arrived home, my wife and daughter having packed up their belongings and informed me they were going to stay at their mother's place. Deeply hurt and upset, exhaustion held me back from expressing my feelings properly. The timing of my wife's departure, right after my chemo sessions when she knew I'd be utterly spent and unable to communicate effectively, felt cruel. Seeking clarity, I turned to my daughter and asked if this was truly what she wanted. Her response hit me hard. She said she would rather live with her mother because she found it too difficult to live with me. It was a painful moment watching them leave, tears welling up in my eyes. It was precisely what I had feared when my chemo journey began, feeling unwanted and abandoned. In the midst of my emotional turmoil, my brother stepped in with a solution. He noticed the nurse spending extra time with me that day and inquired if I had any family members nearby who could provide support. Though my brother lived 3 hours away and had 2 young children of his own, he generously offered to take time off from work to stay with me until I could find a more permanent arrangement. Upon his arrival, he was furious about what my wife had done, referring to her as selfish and ungrateful. He pointed out that she had never had to work since our marriage, and I had always ensured she lacked nothing. His time off from work was limited, but he had another suggestion. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a painful divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. Her soon-to-be ex-husband had been the breadwinner, leaving her with limited financial resources. Kara was also studying radiology at a nearby university on scholarship, and my home was conveniently closer to the university campus, making it an ideal solution. Agreeing to the arrangement, I assured my brother that Kara wouldn't have to pay rent since she'd already be putting up with me. My wife and daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and a few dresses. My brother stayed the rest of the week, and Kara arrived on his last day. He helped her move in, and she expressed her gratitude for letting her stay with me. Kara promised to be considerate, clean up after herself, and assist where needed. In the weeks that followed, things went relatively smoothly. I missed my wife and daughter, but it appeared that I was the only one feeling that way because they didn't even bother to call or check up on me. Kara's presence proved to be a tremendous help. She took care of grocery shopping, handled most of the cleaning, and even assisted with meal preparation. Throughout this time, she never uttered a single complaint. About a month and a half after my wife's departure, I received the news that I was cancer-free, a momentous occasion celebrated by ringing the bell at the hospital. My nurse asked me now that I was essentially cured. My immediate decision was to file for a unilateral divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that had proven unsupportive during my challenging journey. With the divorce proceedings in motion, my focus shifted toward the next crucial step, recovering from cancer. Slowly but surely, I began to regain my strength. My hair grew back, my scars started to heal, and I was putting on weight, while sticking to my healthy meal regime for the most part. I allowed myself some cheat days to savor the favorite meals I had missed during my illness. It's been 6 months since I've been declared cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally ready to move on with my life. I made a call to my old job, and they're willing to rehire me for remote work if I choose to return. I think I'll take them up on the offer because I'm planning to move away. While I have an attachment to my house, there are too many painful memories here. I yearn for a fresh start with something smaller. My wife doesn't know it yet, but I'm planning to give the house to Kara. She came through for me when I was at my lowest, showing immense kindness even though we were practically strangers. She's free to sell it if she wishes. I no longer want anything to do with it, especially if it means my wife or daughter could lay claim to it. My new place is in a quiet neighborhood in the countryside, and I'm eagerly looking forward to this new beginning. Update number 1. Hey wife and daughter. It's been over a year since my initial diagnosis, and I've settled into my new place and neighborhood nicely. There are plenty of friendly folks around here, and I've made friends with my neighbors, including Sophia, who lives across the way. She's a widow who lives alone, with her kids scattered across the country, visiting only during Christmas and her birthday. Sophia invited me to her porch for drinks and conversation, and she shared the heartbreaking story of losing her husband to lung cancer. She emphasized how important life insurance was for her family's financial security. During our conversation, I opened up about what happened with my wife and daughter. Surprisingly, I still hadn't heard a word from them, but I've come to terms with it. I've been spending my time pursuing new hobbies, particularly woodworking, and I'm starting to build up a collection of tools. One day, when I returned from the hardware store, Sophia informed me that she had noticed some people hanging around my house. Fortunately, they didn't do anything harmful or steal anything, but they did approach the door, knock a few times, wander around the house, and eventually waited in their car. Sophia considered calling the sheriff's office, but decided against it, thinking they might be family. I asked her to describe them, and her description matched my wife and daughter. I couldn't fathom how they had found my new residence, as only my brother and his wife knew my current address. It left me wondering why they were looking for me after leaving almost a year ago without looking back. Sophia assured me that if they returned, I shouldn't come out, and she would handle the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they abandoned me. During my lowest point, later that night, I called my brother, who informed me that my wife and daughter had been harassing Kara and her roommate at my old house. Fortunately, Kara had documented proof that the house was now in her name, and she had explained that she had bought it for me, a smart move on her part. I felt bad that Kara had to go through this ordeal because of my family, so I called her directly to apologize. Hopefully, the next time they come around, I can resolve the situation for good. As for my wife, I'm not sure if she's aware of the unilateral divorce. My lawyer sent a copy to her mother's house, but it's possible they mistook it for junk mail. Regardless, I've reached a point where I no longer care. She and I are no more. Update number 2. My wife and daughter showed up at the house again, but this time it was earlier in the day while I was working. I heard the knock and decided to check the security cameras, and sure enough, it was them. My ex-wife looked just as I remembered her, but Luna had grown significantly. She was practically a young woman now. I followed the plans Sophia and I had discussed, staying inside but moving closer to the door to hear them better. Sophia, ever the good neighbor, came over to greet them and introduced herself. My wife asked if she knew a man named Charlie who used to live there. Sophia sounded just as baffled as I was and questioned her use of used to. My wife explained that her husband, not ex-husband, had lived in this house before his recent untimely death following an extended hospital stay. My jaw hit the floor at this revelation because, to my knowledge, there was no record of my death anywhere, especially not at the hospital where I underwent treatment. My wife went on to claim that they were the next of kin, implying that the home was rightfully theirs. Sophia informed them that someone named Charlie did live there for a while, but clarified that he was a divorcee. She also shared that during our time as neighbors, I had informed her that my wife had left me, and I had filed for a unilateral divorce. Sophia added that, as far as she knew, I intended to bequeath all my assets to charity, since I had no other family besides my brother. This was why she found it strange to see 2 women snooping around my house. The conversation fell into an uncomfortable silence before Sophia inquired if they had a death certificate or a will. They replied in the negative. Sophia explained that once they had those documents, they could take them to the county's record office. If they were indeed the rightful owners of the property, they could then get the deed in their name. My wife did not take kindly to this suggestion. She asked Sophia who she thought she was and started screaming, asserting that Sophia had no authority to interfere in her affairs. She also accused Sophia of being nosy and demanded that she mind her own business. Feeling a deep sense of embarrassment, the people in this neighborhood had been nothing but kind to me, and here my ex-wife was making a scene and disturbing their peace. Part of me wanted to go out there and give her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with our plan. Sophia, bless her heart, apologized to them and explained that she was merely trying to be helpful. She returned to her own home, and shortly after, my ex-wife and daughter left. After finishing work, I went over to Sophia's place to apologize. She brushed it off, mentioning that while she found my wife's behavior repulsive, she also found the outbursts somewhat amusing. I wished I could agree with her, but I knew my wife could be hot-tempered when upset. If she ever returns, I am determined to confront her and ask her to leave me in peace. She came back again yesterday. I was sitting in my home office when I heard a loud crash. Rushing out to the living room, I found my front window smashed and people were outside screaming. I thought there might be a maniac on the loose, and it turns out I wasn't entirely wrong. It was my ex-wife. She had smashed my window, and my neighbors were out there trying to stop her. Apparently, she had been causing a ruckus for a while, but I hadn't heard it because I had my noise-canceling headphones on while doing some QA work. Frankly, I wouldn't have heard her even if I hadn't paused the music for a break. When I got outside, 2 of my elderly neighbors were doing their best to restrain my ex from causing more damage. Both she and Luna were holding bats, and they had already broken a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her by the arm and asked if she had lost her damn marbles. Needless to say, she was shocked to see me, or rather, shocked to see me alive. I told both her and my daughter to get off my property before I called the cops. Unbeknownst to me, my neighbors had already placed the call. She seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't contacted her after I got better. She insisted that she and Luna would have come back. I told her that when we got married, we made vows to stand by each other in sickness and health, and she broke those vows. I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. She's no longer my wife. I sent the divorce papers months ago. I asked her again to leave. Then she asked about her daughter and mentioned that she's going to college next year and she can't afford the tuition on her own. I replied, "Your daughter was fine with abandoning me too, and I'm ready to give up all my parental rights to you. You should have thought of that before you abandoned me. I don't want anything to do with either of you." After hearing that, she went from upset to angry, calling me selfish and heartless, which I found rather amusing given the circumstances. "You're the last person who should be calling anyone selfish." I screamed back, called her an entitled jerk, and made it clear that I'd ensure she never got a dime from me again. Then she swung at me with a bat just as the cops showed up. They immediately arrested both her and my daughter. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and of course I did. My ex and daughter started crying loudly as they were loaded into the back of the police car, but I felt no sympathy for them. I had everything that happened on camera, including my wife smashing the window, and I had already submitted it to the police. After work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the glass. Someone will be coming to deal with it tomorrow, but for now, a rigged-up tarp is keeping out the elements. Sophia gave me some buckets to put my plants in until I can replace the pots. Curious about what had brought my ex-wife back, I did some digging. It turns out her mom passed away 2 months ago, and they found out that the house they had been staying in didn't belong to her or her husband. It belonged to his cousin. The cousin decided to kick them out because he wanted to sell it. With both of my ex-wife's parents now gone, she and her daughter sold most of their parents' belongings and have been living in a motel for a while. When they came back to our old home and saw Kara there, they assumed I had died and went snooping around for recordings of my assets and purchases, which is how they found me. Regardless, they're facing charges of vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted assault. Since Luna is a minor, she's receiving community service, but my ex-wife is facing time behind bars, as this was clearly premeditated. I'm considering obtaining a restraining order as well. At least for now, I won't have to worry about